right, good morning, my dear grade 11 students. I hope that this video finds you well. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about the types of organizations. This is in chapter 5 in business management class. So today, what we're going to talk about is the different types of businesses and organizations, whether we're talking about public organizations owned by the government or the different types of the private organizations as well. All right, so today's learning outcomes that we're going to work on is, number one, we're going to show the difference between both the public sector and the private sector. So we have two main types of businesses, which is the public sector and the private sector. All right, so the word sector here, it means a group of businesses which provide a similar type of products. Remember when we talked about the primary sector and secondary sector and the tertiary sector? Just go ahead and on the meaning of the word sector. So we're going to distinguish or to find the differences between the public sector and the private sector. Then we're going to start with the first type of the private businesses, which is the sole trader. This is considered one of the smallest privately owned business. Again, sole trader, it means that it's owned by only one person. All right, then we're going to explain the characteristics, the properties of the sole trader business in terms of who is controlling this business, who is taking the decision making, how is it financed, where is the money needed to pay for the land, pay for the workers, pay for different business needs come from. So where does the money come from? The advantages and disadvantages, the pros and cons of having a sole trader, what would be good and what would be bad if you start a business as a sole trader, and the difficulties of starting a business like a sole trader. Okay, so let's start with the first learning outcome, which is the differentiation between the public sector and the private sector. Okay, so the public sector, this is a group of organizations which are owned and operated by the government. So the government owns, let's say, the electricity company or the water company. Back in the 1990s here in Egypt and in different parts of the world, most of the water and electricity companies were owned and controlled by the governments. So this is public sector organizations which are mainly owned and controlled by the government. So what do we mean by the word controlled here? Is who takes the decision in a public hospital, let's say the public hospital. It is the Ministry of Health, all right? Who is controlling the public school? Again, this is the Ministry of Education. How is it financed? Well, it's financed through the taxation collected from people, right? All right, moving on to the following point. Now we're talking about public sector organizations. They serve for only one purpose, which is producing the underprovided services the underprovided services by the private business. Now the private business, again, it aims for making profits. So if we think about a good or service which is not paid by the consumers, like the roads or the public parks, right? Then the private businesses wouldn't be interested in producing these goods, right? Now, if the government left the private sector producing these goods like medicine or healthcare or education, we have a great number of people who will not be able to afford these services. So in order to ensure that all people can afford these services, well, the government will start intervening by producing public education, public healthcare, and other goods and services to ensure that even the poor people can afford these essential services like education and healthcare, right? All right, let's move on. Okay, so the number or the examples on the public sector companies, which would be the different examples on the public organizations which are owned and controlled by the government. Well, we have the public schools, which follows the Ministry of Education and owned by the people, and the Ministry of Education, it's financed through the taxation. Public hospitals, the official broadcasting channels, owned again by the government. Some of the post offices in the 1990s and the 2000s before the privatization took place all over the world, or in most countries around the world. All right, so again, in order to recap on the public sectors, we have to put in our minds that the finance, yes, it's financed by the taxes collected from people, right? Controlled all these public institutions and public organizations like the public school or public hospital. It's controlled by the relevant ministry and board of directors. So the ministry sometimes hires or appoints a number of managers or directors to manage the public hospitals or to public schools. All right. The third characteristic is that most or all these public sector organizations, they do not aim for profit, but they aim for, well, providing the essential services to the people in need, right? Okay, so these are the main characteristics that you have to know about when you're talking about the public sector organizations. All right, now let's move on to the second type of the organizations in any country in a mixed economic system. So we have the private sector, and under the private sector we have different types of businesses. Some of them are very small and some of them are, well, gigantic, huge, big multinational companies which operates in different countries around the world. They own different branches around the world. So we have the very small, which starts with the sole trader businesses, very small business, and the biggest business is the biggest private business is the multinational companies like Facebook, like Twitter, like Mercedes, like Xerox, and other multinational companies which operates in different countries. All right. So so the private sector here, it's owned and controlled, unlike the public sector organizations. It's owned and controlled by private individuals and businesses. It varies in size from small businesses like the groceries to the big multinational companies like the Facebook or Microsoft and etc. All right. Okay, so the main aim for these private sector businesses is to achieve profit, to maximize or to have the highest amount of profit in order to satisfy the needs of the business owners. So the profit is made when the total amount of the revenues collected from selling the product surpasses or is higher than the total costs of production. So to recap again on the main characteristics of the private sector organizations, number one, it's owned and controlled by private individuals, private investors. Number two, which is that it varies in size. We have the very small, like the sole trader that we're going to talk about later on, to the very big or to the very big or to the biggest size of the private companies, which is the multinational companies. The main purpose of these companies, the private sector companies, is that they aim for making profits. And number 4 is that the profit is made when the revenues collected is higher than the costs. All right, now moving on to the checkpoint. Public sector is gap, and gap by gap. So public sector is public sector companies owned and controlled by the government. Private sector is owned and controlled and financed through private or regular investors, right? Public sector is financed through, yes, it is financed through the taxes. Private sector is financed through, all right, it's financed through the investments made by regular people or regular investors who decide to open or to start up new businesses. All right, true or false question. Private sector is a group of state-owned organizations. True or false? Private sector is a group of state-owned, it means owned by the government. Yes, it's false. Private sector, it's the public sector which is owned by the state-owned organizations. All right, number 2, private sector is financed through taxes. No, it is the public sector which is financed through taxes. Number 3, private sector is financed by the number of ways, like personal savings, loans, and selling shares. Yes, definitely. A company, private company like Facebook, it's financed through selling shares in the stock, right? In the stock market. All right, now let's move on to number 4. Public sector is a group of state-owned organization. Now, this time, that's true. All right, moving on to the first type of, to the different types of the private business types. Okay, the smallest one, which is the sole trader. It's owned by only one person. The partnership, it's between having, or the business starts up with 2 to 20 partners. All these partners are considered as owners for the partnership business. Then, the corporations, the multinational companies, which are selling shares in the stock exchange market in order to have the capital needed to operate on a large scale. Okay, so the sole trader, this is the smallest type of the private businesses. Partnership, this is much bigger because we have more partners, more owners than the sole trader. And the corporations, we might have thousands and thousands of owners who buy shares in a company like Facebook, which is considered as corporations. All right. Now moving on to the first type of the sole trader, which is the smallest. It's considered as the small business owned by only one owner. So only one owner is responsible for this business. Only one owner is taking the profits. Only one owner is taking the decisions needed to operate and run the business. Now, what is this owner, the sole owner, the only owner responsible for? Well, he is responsible for success and failure. Now, if the business failed and the business went bankrupt, it means that this person will be responsible for all the debts and the loans needed to be paid back to the banks. All right. Now, the examples on the sole trader, we have the plumbers, we have lawyers, we have mechanics, we have freelance photographers, right? So again, characteristics owned and controlled by one person, aims for profit, Only one person is responsible for success and failure of the business. And the examples on the sole trader would be the lawyers, the plumbers, mechanics, and freelance photographers. Now, let's think about this question here together. Would you like to be a sole trader one day? Well, let's grab a piece of paper. Think about it for 2-3 minutes and write why wouldn't you like to be a sole trader, or why wouldn't you like to start your business as a sole trader? Why would you like to start a partnership? All right, so some of the reasons which encourages people to start their own businesses, to start up their own businesses as sole traders, is that, well, the profits of this business, the profits of the plumber, or the profits of a school goes to only one person, which means that this is not going to, the profits will not be shared, the profits will not be divided among different partners. Right? Common sense. The profits goes to only one person because we have only one person in the sole trader business, right? The second is that we have privacy, right? This type of businesses, which is the sole trader, they do not the law does not require them to publish anything related to the profits or related to the losses that the company or that this business is making, right? Number 3 is that it provides personalized services, which is direct and friendly. These type of businesses, they have direct relationship with the customers, right? They can easily talk with the customers, know about their problems, know about what they like and what they dislike, because this is a very small business. So the business owner here would have a personal relationship with the customers and know about what they like and dislike. All right. Some of the difficulties or some of the reasons that people do not prefer this type of business to start up with is that, number 1, we have limited sources of finance because we have only one person who is using his own personal savings, and therefore the amount of the money available to start the business is not going to be enough to start a big business. So at the end of the day, we do not have enough money to start up a big business. Number 2, there will be high risks because, again, there is only one person responsible for the failure, right? So if the business went bankrupt, it means that this lonely person this poor person will be responsible for paying back the business loans. All right, number 3, which is the fact that this type of business is overkilling. It requires a lot of work and stress. This person who owns this type of business, which is the sole trader, he doesn't take weekends or holidays because, well, he's working alone, right? And he's responsible alone for everything. Number 4, which is limited economies of scale. So limited economies of scale, it means that the production of this business is very limited, and therefore this business wouldn't be able to reduce the cost per unit. All right, so this is a question for your practice. Based on the previous slides, list 5 reasons why some lawyers prefer to form a sole trader office. This means reasons why some lawyers prefer. So this means, or this implies, that you're going to talk about the advantages or the pros or the good things about starting a business like a sole trader. Okay, question two. Question two, list 5 reasons a restaurant owner might look for partners to join his business. This is a subtle question, which is indicating or implying indirectly that you're going to talk about, yes, the disadvantages of a sole trader. So list 5 reasons a restaurant owner might look for partners. It means that we're going to talk about the disadvantages, which prevents or which discourages this person from starting a sole trader business, and therefore he's going to look for partners, right? Be smart. When you read questions, be smart, be strategic when you read the questions. Try to deduce or try to infer or try to understand what does the question imply, right? All right, good luck with the questions. Okay, let's move